Hi, it's Kim Kaase again with Leap Transformative Coaching and Consulting. And in the last video, we talked about listening. And we talked about what things keep people from listening very well. We talked about ways of listening and habits of listening that don't support people really being the best that they can be. And then we also talked about listening with an understanding, like really listening to understand other people. We talked about listening to be impacted as well. And that way of listening, like to really listen to be impacted, listening with not much on our minds, that really starts to generate trust and respect and alignment in teams that start to listen that way, right? And we talked about, that there was a misunderstanding going on, okay? And that's why sometimes people didn't listen maybe the way that is more productive. And in this video, what I would like to explain and tease out is a little bit more about that misunderstanding. Okay, and this is a really important point. So I just, again, want you to settle in and listen to be impacted, kind of listen with not a lot on your mind, and hopefully just really try to see something new. So there's a prevalent misunderstanding in the world, and it's this, and it has to do with how the mind works. Okay, and it looks in life that the human experience, that my experience or your experience is coming from the outside most of the time. That like what people are doing on the outside, or the stress of a job, or our bank accounts, like all kinds of things, the weather, some people, whether your team wins or loses, like that has the capacity to generate a specific experience or feeling in you. Okay. And that's a really big misunderstanding. Like that, as we're going to be talking about on retreat, is not the way it works. It's not how human experience works. The way it actually works is that things do happen on the outside. Of course, we live in a reality where there are a lot of moving parts. But what happens in between something happening and our experience, like the feeling of it, is that we each individually have thought in there. Okay, that there's this huge power of thought that starts to make things up about our experience. And sometimes our thoughts can be really accurate, but then other times not. And I know that I wouldn't have to have you guys think very far to think about times when our mind makes something up that's not happening. Okay. And the problem with this is when we're in the misunderstanding, when we think that like that particular feelings of not being trusted, not being respected, not being listened to, like if we think that the feeling of that is coming from the outside, what happens is like we start to let other people affect us, right? So whatever a person's either doing or not doing, what they're saying or not saying, the way that they're behaving, when we think that has the capacity to give us a particular feeling, then it sets off reactivity in us, right? Like if I think, just for example, like if I was giving a talk about this, and somebody in the audience was kind of, I don't know, doing something disruptive, or, rolling their eyes or whatever. Like if I was under the misunderstanding that my feelings about that come from that person, then I would have no choice but to be offended. Okay. And if I was under that misunderstanding and I thought I need to be offended, then I'm going to start to react to that immediately. Right. Now, And that alone is not great. But then there are other things. It really kind of sets up a chain reaction. So then we're going to start seeing people, like I might, as a speaker, then start to see people or look at the audience and wonder, like, well, who's next? Who's going to do something else that offends me, right? We start to see people as like against us, or, we start certainly that people lose their innocence when we get into our own reactivity, right? And then on down the line, like what starts to happen is maybe if I would go speak again and something kind of, again, detrimental starts happening, like we see that as like, oh, here we go again. Anytime I go to speak, this is what's going to happen. Like we see that as our reality. And we start to really we don't start to see, we don't continue to see reality as objective at all. We start to see it as like a place where we can gather evidence to sort of prove, that in this case, like that people are jerks or, whatever. Okay. And that's all based on that one misunderstanding, right? That when I think I can be affected somehow, like when my own experience feels like it's directly wired by whether somebody in the audience is yawning or making rude comments or whatever, then it just sends me down a path that's not productive. Okay, now here's the flip side. This is the piece that I want you to really consider as you go about the next few weeks, is that when you start to see that experience, that human experience, or another way to describe that would be your feelings, that thought, that like my individual thinking, the power of thought, and your individual thinking and the power of thought are connected to that experience every time, like 100% of the time, like not just now and then. Like I know that each of you have had experiences where you can see your thought in it. Like most people have had a feeling or an experience where, oh, like I'm doing that to myself. Like people have had that. But what people miss that's so important is that that's going on 100% of the time. Not just, 20% of the time or even 90% of the time. Like it's happening every single time. And what happens then is that, like, when you have that understanding, like when you realize that for yourself, not just because I'm saying it, okay? This is not an intellectual understanding I'm trying to get you to. I'm trying to get you to see in an embodied level, have your own realization that thought and feeling are connected 100% of the time. That what happens for people, what I see happen time and time again, what's happened for myself, is that people start to get more neutral about life. Like they get more neutral about other people. They get more, like they react less and they get more natural, okay? Instead of reactive, right? We just sort of wait and see. We find ourselves listening better. Right? We get real curious about people. And when you see this happening and feel it happening in yourself, like the chain reaction that automatically happens out of this understanding is that, like, you start to see people as like innocent in a way, like not like innocent guilty, but you see that other people are thinkers, like you're a thinker, and there are a lot of people in this misunderstanding really caught in it. There aren't very many people these days that are onto the fact that this is true 100% of the time. And so when you start to see that, oh gosh, my thinking's always included, like it just not naturally settles you down. And so then when something happens, like in the last example, like if I'm giving a talk, but I'm really in the understanding, then I start to see like that like even if someone would be yawning and maybe making a comment about my speech, and they really were doing it about me, what I would naturally see by understanding is that that person is also in their thinking. Like they're living in their thinking. Like they're not, they think they're reacting to me, but they're really not. Like they're really, it's very innocent. Like they just are doing what they do because they're mixed up. And so, and I would just carry on with my speech, right? I might think about polishing up my speaking skills, but I wouldn't take it to heart, you know? So you can see that's just one example of this understanding that on one hand, when you really misunderstand what's happening in the human experience in a conversation and giving a speech, whatever, when you misunderstand, there's one direction that it goes, and it's more to, you know, reaction and having a lot on your mind and being offended and gathering evidence and that sort of thing. And that when you're able to see that we're all living in the feeling of our thinking all the time, 100% of the time, like it's, when you realize that, it settles you down. It has you just be more neutral in life, and it can then engender the things that what we're trying to do as a team. So I want to go back then to, what does this all have to do with a leadership team and with trust and respect and alignment? And here's what I see about that, is that I see that it's really hard, if not impossible, to have a highly productive team without trust, respect, and alignment. Like, I don't know how you would do that. I think if any of those three, trust, respect, or alignment, if any of those are missing from your team, I think it's going to make work a lot harder, right? And this understanding versus misunderstanding that I'm talking about is like, it's key to grow trust, respect, and alignment. You see, because again, when people aren't as easily offended, when they tend to take things in stride, when they, even if somebody is going off and being not nice, like if the other person can just really stay grounded and neutral and not take it personally, like that gains trust. It grows trust just automatically. So a lot of this, it's not that we need to learn a bunch of new skills, right? It's that when you guys get a better handle on this understanding, and when you start to have realizations for yourself and insights for yourself that we're trying to plant the seeds for now, that trust, respect, and alignment are really going to start to grow. Now, I also thought about, what other things are related to this that would create better conditions for trust, respect, and alignment to start really taking root. And so I thought of a few things, and it's really that the first one is just having an honest desire to understand another person's perspective, right? You guys are a team who, you come from different places and you have different life experiences, and even within architecture and design, you've done it differently. Everyone's coming from probably a slightly different perspective. But when you begin to again sort out this misunderstanding and have realization about understanding where your own experience is coming from, like, it's what wells up out of that is an honest desire to understand someone else's perspective. Now, notice that I'm not saying an honest desire to have other people understand you. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's an inside job. Like that your own desire to understand others is going to start to expand. Okay, and we want to see what that does. Okay, and then the second thing I think that helps trust and respect and alignment is that like being fully present with people. What I mean by that is, going back to the listening video, is that when we're fully present, when we're not thinking about what we're going to say next, or we're not trying to solve their problem in our heads, or we're not trying to defend ourselves, or all the other things that we do when we're in a misunderstanding, like when we really sit in understanding that my experience is coming from me 100% of the time, it's coming from me, then it allows us to be fully present in the moment. And that's not something we need to generate. Okay, I want to distinguish that I'm not talking about mindfulness. I'm not talking about anything like that. I'm not talking about generating being nice. I'm really talking about that presence it's what naturally wells up when we don't have a lot of thinking about ourselves or thinking about another person. As our mind settles, presence is one of the things that comes in. And then lastly, another thing that, again, arises from the understanding and really contributes to trust, respect, and alignment is a natural sense of curiosity. Okay? Like, curiosity is something that, if you look at small children, if any of you guys have small children, like, kids are curious as all get out. Like, they want to know how everything works and why this and why that. And that's a real natural state for kids, but it's something that sort of gets culturized out of us as adults. Like, there's all kinds of things about not being curious. Curiosity killed the cat, and not being nosy or whatever. But none of that's really true. Like, that's not helpful, really. When we get really curious about another human being, right, another person on our team, like really curious, like, oh wow, I wonder why they would say that the way they say it, or I wonder why that solution looks good to them. Like, it's really amazing what we can discover. And again, that natural curiosity is something that on its own starts building trust and respect and alignment. So you can start to see, or I hope you can start to see that, again, by starting to have insight around this understanding that I'm talking about, that thought and feeling are connected, and that they're getting generated from inside of us, like they're not something that we need to blame on other people, that as we listen, really generously to other people, and we actually listen, that some of the things that you guys really want, respect and trust and alignment, like, those naturally come out of all this. Like, we don't have to do a lot of extra work to generate those. In other words, notice that I'm not telling you how to behave. I'm not actually interested in your behavior. What I'm interested in is where that behavior comes from. Right? And it comes from the fact that whether you have an understanding and you understand thought and feeling are connected, there's going to be behavior that comes out of that, right? And then if you don't understand that and you're really turned around, like, again, innocently, many of us are before this is pointed out to us 100% of the time, then the behavior is just going to be bad. It's going to be mistrustful. It's going to be disrespectful. And so these videos, this retreat that we're about to go on, it's going to provide us a place, an understanding, and a foundation from which to relate to one another differently and more productively. And it's going to provide a place to really start to begin to build trust again, build respect, build alignment among the team. So again, so your assignment is really just to watch, like start to notice where your thought and your feeling are connected. Like see if you can see that sometimes. And see if you can see where sometimes we just carried away with our thinking, and then of course we feel it. Like see if you can open yourself to some insight around that. And then I'll talk to you soon.